webcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, good morning, everybody. This is Stacy Jones, DDA's Statewide Career and Employment Services Coordinator. Thank you to everybody that's joining us this morning for another Employment First webinar. Before I jump into our content, as usual, I just want to make sure I work through a few technical items related to the webinar so that everybody can get oriented. As a reminder, all of the participants, you're in listen-only mode. So if throughout the webinar you have questions or comments, you'll have to type them into either the question or the chat box, which is in the panel on the right side of your screen. There's two options to listen to the webinar. You can connect via your computer or your telephone. If you have trouble hearing during the webinar, you might want to try switching by clicking the appropriate button on the webinar panel. But be aware, if you're connected via both your computer and your phone, please make sure to turn down the sound on your computer so that you don't get feedback. The PowerPoint slides that I'm going to be going through for today's webinar are available for download to you right now. So again, if you look at the panel on the right side of your screen, you'll see the little tiny button at the bottom that says handouts. You can download that. However, don't worry if you have trouble, because sometimes people report that they're unable to download it. The PowerPoint will be emailed to all participants that are registered for today's email. And as with all of our webinars, this one is also being recorded right now and will be available on DDA's website along with the PowerPoint on our archived webinar page and our YouTube channel within the next few weeks. So again, that's the most frequently asked question I get following a webinar is how do I get a copy? And that's how you get a copy. You're going to wait till it gets uploaded to the website. So now that that housekeeping is out of the way, I'm going to shift gears here and I'm going to actually try to navigate to our website so I can actually point out a few resources. Now, I'm going to keep it real. When I tried this earlier this morning, my computer started to freeze up. So if so, we'll abort mission. But I want you to see on the right-hand side of the screen, I actually wrote DDA's main website address. I'm just going to click on it, see if we can go to it without any trouble here. And I want to point out a few resources because some of you may be joining us for the first time, and I want to make sure that if this information that I'm going to present today leaves you with lots of other questions, that you know how to go to our website and find some answers. So first, if you go to our main webpage, on the top here, you'll see where it says join our mailing list. If you're not already on our mailing list, I would recommend doing that. That's going to make sure that anytime we send out a newsletter or an announcement or a webinar link, you're going to get a copy of that. So I like to make sure people know to do that. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see under the heading Services We Provide, there's two that I want to point out to you. One is you can click on the Employment First dedicated page, which takes you to this page, has our Employment First logo on the front of it, and this has got lots of resources directly related to Meaningful Day and employment services. I'm not going to go through them all today, but I just want you to be aware there is a lot here. You can sign up to receive our newsletters, you can read old archived newsletters, you can read success stories, you can look at our data employment initiative, and if you keep scrolling down, you'll see lots of resources on the right-hand side of the page related to organizational transformation, all about customized employment, transportation, all kinds of good resources. But the thing that I wanted to come here to show you is, again, go back to the left-hand side tab, and you'll see one that says Training and Webinars. Click Webinars. And here is the page where all of our webinars get archived. So if I reference something today, you'll know this is where you can find something that was previously recorded and uploaded. And you can see that there's a lot of them, and specifically Employment First going all the way back to 2015. But I wanted to make you aware, in case you haven't already been made aware, there was a presentation that was recorded back in January, which provides a very in-depth overview specifically about Meaningful Day services and all of the changes related to them. So I'm not going to get into that level of detail today, but I want to make sure that you're aware that that resource exists. You can actually watch the recorded webinar, or you could simply download the PowerPoint that's right here. Okay, so see if I can make it back to my other screen. There we go. Okay, thank you. So the presentation that I just referenced on the website, everything that's in that presentation still remains accurate, with the exception of the information that I'm going to walk through with you right now. And that has to do with the time limitation definition for career exploration. So based on stakeholder feedback that was received during our waiver amendment public comment period last month, DDA has changed how it is defining the time limitation parameters for the service called career exploration. And as a reminder, per CMS, this is expected to be a time-limited service. However, it's up to each state to define how that time limitation is defined. So over the next two slides, I'm going to provide the time limitation for both people that are approved before July of 2020 and after July of 2020. And then I'll talk through a little extra guidance on that. So first, anyone authorized for career exploration, and that can be whether it's facility, small, or large group supports, between now and July 1st, 2020, will create an employment goal within their person-centered plan during their annual team process that outlines their trajectory and transition timeframe toward competitive integrated employment. And notice there is no hard phase-out date included here, and instead, we want people to address their individual trajectory based on their particular situations and their circumstances. And note that if the person's going to be reauthorized for this service, the person will need to maintain a current employment goal in their person-centered plan, along with continuing evidence that the person and the team is still working on that, that identified trajectory toward those employment outcomes. Okay, so now we're going to shift to any new people authorized for career exploration after July 1st, 2020. Can be authorized for up to 720 hours for the person's plan year. This provides the flexibility to support various career exploration opportunities that can occur at different times during the year. Note that the original time limitation was expressed as 90 days, but we needed to make sure that we could appropriately operationalize this based on not a daily unit, but instead an hourly unit because of the changes in our system after July 2020. So 90 days at a maximum of 8 hours a day equates 720 hours. Okay, so I realize that one of the very first questions that arises when we talk about this process is, how do we know, or who makes the determination if a person's employment is competitive integrated employment? And from here on out, I'm just going to say CIE. So if I say CIE, you'll know that's what I'm referencing. And that's an important question, but I'm going to walk through that in depth in just a few more minutes. So just hold on to that thought. I will get there. So if a person requests and is authorized for less than 720 hours of career exploration after July 2020, can they use additional hours up to the full 720 hours in a later plan year? So for instance, let's say the person thinks they only want half of those hours and that's all that gets approved. The answer to that is no. New people after July 1st, 2020 will be authorized only once for career exploration, no matter how many hours are used within their plan year, unless otherwise authorized by DDA. And situations that I can foresee that might be authorized would include situations where a person experienced circumstances like maybe an illness or hospitalization, and because of those extenuating circumstances, was unable to use the 720 hours. But we would want to know what the circumstances were and why that person was seeking that. Okay, now that we've touched on the time limitation for career exploration, we're going to move on and discuss competitive integrated employment, or CIE, and I'm going to really take time to walk through each component carefully. And I do realize that as I'm talking, people are going to start thinking of questions, and that's good, But I'm not going to stop and look for questions until the very end, because I want to make sure I walk through each aspect. And I think some questions may be answered as I go. So be thinking of questions, but it would be helpful if you can, of course, you can type them in at any time. I just won't read them until the end. So I will get to questions, I promise. So as a reminder, these are the things that we've touched on in previous webinars, more in depth, but I just want to provide the framework for what I'm going to walk through. DDA's meaningful day services are designed to support a person on their path to CIE, and this really means no matter where the person might be on the path. That includes people that may not currently have goals related to employment. It could include people of retirement age who no longer are interested in pursuing employment, and everything in between. DDA services, which are included under the umbrella of meaningful day services, are designed to support a person to explore, seek, and maintain CIE. And again, as I noted in the beginning, if you're listening and these things aren't making sense because you're not familiar with those are, I would suggest, again, going back to listening to the recorded presentation on the website, which is a good resource when you have the time to do that. And finally, DDA is creating currently policy and guidance related to CIE and authorization for employment services. And before I walk through the guidance, I want to provide an overview of the process that we used internally when developing these types of guidance. First, we reviewed and considered federal guidelines and definitions that are outlined in the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA. We coordinated with our state partners at the Maryland Division of Rehab Services, or DORS, to align closely with their definitions of CIE, also based on WIOA, and to collaborate on people who may be accessing both funding sources. And in a few minutes, we're going to be joined very briefly by one of our partners at DORS to talk a little bit about that piece. We also kept in mind guidance received from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, or CMS, related to their final settings rule requirements, as well as guidance provided by them related to the provision of employment services through the use of home and community-based setting waiver funding. We gathered stakeholder feedback. We worked and continue to work with national subject matter experts through NASDs, the SELN, and others who help us look at broader systems development, as well as national trends and best practices related to employment and system development. And finally, and definitely not least, we kept in mind our own state of Maryland and DDA's Employment First Division. If you want to hear more about those initiatives, again, I would recommend checking out one of our previous webinars where we go more in depth in each of those things. But in the next few slides, I'm going to walk through what all of that means in relation to our new menu of employment services. Maryland is an employment first state. I know that's not a surprise to any of you. That's why you're here. And therefore, the DDA prioritizes both in policy and practice the opportunity for people with developmental disabilities to achieve competitive integrated employment through an array of employment services. And therefore, employment services are not meant to support people, are meant to support people in obtaining and sustaining competitive integrated employment. So now we're going to drill down a little bit more on how we define those things. The Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act guidance says, in part, that CIE refers to full or part-time work at minimum wage or higher, with wages and benefits similar to workers without disabilities performing the same work, and fully integrated with coworkers without disabilities. I'm also, in this PowerPoint, when you download it, you can use the hyperlink that's on the screen to go to a WIOA fact sheet that was developed by NASDs, the National Association of State Developmental Disabilities Directors, in case people are interested in reading that. And it's actually a really nice fact sheet that kind of runs through the basics of WIOA for people that might be interested. So now what I'm going to walk through is DDA's current guidance and attestation for people seeking service authorization and or reauthorization for DDA employment services after July 1st, 2020, through the services called follow-along job supports and ongoing job supports. Again, those two services in particular are services that are designed to support people in successfully maintaining their competitive integrated jobs. So in order to be authorized for that service, a person should be competitively employed. They should have competitive wages, should be in an integrated location, and the job should provide the same opportunities for advancement and benefits as other employees. The guidance provided is meant to assist people with developmental disabilities that are seeking DDA-funded services. It's meant to assist coordinators of community services and the person's chosen support teams, which certainly could include family, friends, and whoever else, provider organizations, whoever the person has chosen as their support team, to determine whether the position has the qualities of CIE and to assist in the completion of an attestation form for the person's file. In other words, we really are expecting people and teams to use this guidance in order to make the appropriate determination. If a person's employment does not currently satisfy the criteria of CIE, the person would not be authorized for follow-along or ongoing job supports, and instead may be more appropriate for the service called career exploration that I discussed a few slides back. So for example, sheltered workshops don't qualify as CIE because they don't meet the integrated criteria. And if a position does not meet the criteria of CIE, the person and their team should explore all the options with the person in order to decide how to proceed. And after I work through the criteria, I'll circle back and talk a little bit more about that. So the following types of positions may or may not qualify as CIE depending on the job characteristics and the quality of the person's experience, and will be considered on a case-by-case basis using the attestation form. And what I mean by may or may not qualify is that this attestation form is not meant to disqualify any type of employment. Instead, it's focused on a person and their individual job and the qualities of that job. So a couple of examples of what I mean by may or may not. So the person is working directly for a DDA-funded service provider, and the provider is the employer of record, either as an employee of the provider organization. So for example, a person might be working as a receptionist answering phones for the provider agency, or as an employee of a provider-owned or operated business. So for example, the person is working in a provider-owned or operated thrift store or other type of business. Or other examples of positions that may or may not qualify. The person is employed through Federal Ability One or Maryland Employment Works programs. Other types of contracted employment. For instance, a provider has a contract with a local business to complete a job. The person completes some or all of the work, and the provider organization pays the person. So this is what our draft attestation looks like, and I'm going to walk through it step by step. And I didn't actually, include a copy of the actual form because it's a little awkward to put it up on a PowerPoint slide, so I kind of chunked it out into little pieces so you can see it. But obviously we'll send out a copy of the finalized guidance. So bear with me while I walk through it. These are the things that we want to know are true. The first statement, wages received in the position are competitive. Employment position is integrated and complies with HCBS settings rule requirements. The person has similar opportunities for advancement and benefits. And fourth, which may not always apply for everyone, that's why you see NA on the side, if a person is employed either directly or via contract by the DDA employment service provider, there is an approved conflict of interest policy in place. So let's walk through what each of those things mean, because we need to be able to define each of those questions. So first, the position is competitive when the following elements are present. The position pays an hourly wage at or above the state or local minimum wage rate, whichever is higher for the area in which the employment site is located. So as a note here, you can see we've included Maryland's current minimum wage, noting that Prince George's County and Montgomery County have different minimum wage rates. The position is competitive when these elements are present. The person is not subjected to time studies to which people without disabilities are not also subject. The person is in a position that would potentially be open to any qualified applicant as part of an open labor market. The person is not part of a group. It's not a position that is reserved for a person with a disability and is hired on an individual basis. So I just want to stop here for a minute, because this does not mean that if a job is customized for a particular person, that it's not competitive. So for instance, I'm supporting John, and I've worked with a local employer to customize a position that meets his needs, and also meets the needs of the business. That's a good job match, but it's not just a slot for a person with a disability. So I think that's the key difference there. Employment is not contingent upon receiving services from the provider organization. So service provision is separate from employment, and a service provider has a DDA approved conflict of interest policy in place. And once I walk through the rest of this attestation, I'm going to circle back and I'm going to talk more about conflict of interest. So don't worry, hold on to that thought. I will get back to it. Next, the job environment is typical of the type of work that is generally being performed. Okay, so the type of work that the person is doing, they're doing it in a typical place that typically people do those type of things. Again, not a place that's a place for just people with disabilities to get work, like again, like a sheltered workshop and things like that. So we want to make sure it's a typical setting. The position is integrated and complies with the HCBS settings rule requirements. The person has the same opportunity to interact with coworkers, other employees, customers, and vendors in the work environment as others who do similar tasks, aside from just supervisory staff and people providing services. And this position reflects the person's individual needs and preferences. And the setting provides the person with the opportunity to participate in negotiating his or her work schedule, break times, the person that has leave and medical benefits with the employer to the same extent as other workers that work in that environment. The environment is physically accessible, including access to bathrooms and break rooms, and provide appropriate adaptations and accommodations. And the setting allows people freedom to move about inside and outside the setting, as opposed to one restricted room in an area within the setting, to the same degree, again, as other people that work there who are not people with disabilities receiving services. And finally, the third criteria is we get to similar opportunities for advancement and benefits. So the person's eligible for the level of benefits provided to other employees without disabilities, and has been informed of this eligibility. The person has opportunities for advancement that are similar to those for other employees without disabilities who have similar positions, and has been informed of those opportunities. And the person has opportunities for cross-training or other professional development activities that are similar to those that exist for other employees without disabilities who have similar positions. Okay, so up here is an example of the information that would be requested to be included on the attestation form. Again, I didn't kind of include a screenshot, but these are the pieces of information that are above the checklist. So we would obviously want to know the name of the person that's employed, the employer name, the name of the person's direct supervisor on the job, what's the position title, what's the work location or address where the person will be working, what was the start date of employment, and we ask that any other pertinent information that would support the decision that this is CIE be attached along with the form. So it could be things like maybe a work schedule, if there's benefits information, if there's a job description or a position description that kind of require or that describes a person's functions while they're on the job, or anything else that that may help provide evidence. And then finally, at the end of the form, there's a spot for the person receiving services to sign, as well as their employment service provider or coordinator of community services. And there could certainly be a situation where a person doesn't have a provider, and in that situation, it could be that a CCS is the one signing that. Okay, so I'd like to stop here briefly to remind people listening about DDA's ongoing collaboration with our partners at the Division of Rehab Services, or DORS, related to employment services. And a few weeks ago, DORS had a similar webinar for their CRPs to outline their own use of CIE criteria. And I'm very pleased having joining us today is Tony Cobb-Cannon, who is the staff specialist at DORS. And Tony's going to walk you through over the next few slides kind of about DORS process. So Tony, thank you for joining us, and I'm going to turn things over to you.
Good morning, and thank you for having DORS and allowing us to share our new CIE updates regarding procedures around when an employee is an employer of record. I'm sorry, when an employee works with an employer of record as a CRP, or an Ability One contract, or Employment Works contract. So in the past, we have said that we cannot support anyone applying for such positions or working for such positions. But effective April 1st, we're changing our procedures. And the procedures are going to determine if CIE applies to the employment where the CRP is the employer of record, or the employment may be a part of an Ability One or Employment Works contract. So the procedure is as follows. An employer, you could go back. An employer, so not a DORS staff, but it has to be an employer, may submit an online CIE review request form and attach required documentation. And you can get that form from our website, which is www.dors.maryland.gov. So I'll say that again, www.dors.maryland.gov. You can get that form there. You can either print it or you can submit it online, and you see the website address where you can submit it online. And the questions to that form will be discussed on future slides. Once we receive the request, someone will come out and do an on-site review, or maybe there is not an on-site review required if we get enough documentation to support that it is CIE and we are also familiar with the site. If the CIE is determined, if it is determined that this site and position is CIE, the employer will be notified, and also the position will be placed on a CIE list on our DORS website. And if the employer is interested in us helping recruit, we can do that also. Next slide, please. For more details, we also have a webinar that we did a couple of weeks ago, and it is on our website. And the webinar is about 45 to 60 minutes long. Another update starting April 1st. Placement incentives will no longer be available for positions when the CRP is the employer of record. And I'm just going to rephrase that a different way. And I'm going to read verbatim our policy. Placement incentives are reserved for employment positions which are not positions with Ability One or Maryland Employment Works. Next slide, please. So earlier I mentioned our request form, and I promised that I will share the questions that's on the request form, and they are on this slide as follows. So the first question will be, who is the employer and what is the contact information? Is this review for a position that you are currently recruiting for? Are you the employer of record? Where is the position located? In other words, where will the work be performed? So for example, your admin building might have one address, but the work will be performed at another location. So we need to know that. What is the position title? And then there'll be 7 true-false statements that we'll ask you all to check. And those questions surround if the position is CIE, Competitive Integrated Employment. There'll be a comment section, and then we'll ask you all to attach the position description. And then we'll want to know, is the position a set-aside contract position? And finally, as I mentioned previously, the form has to be completed and signed by the employer, because the employer is certifying everything that was stated on the form is true. Next slide, please. So just to sum it up, there's a DOORS disclaimer, and we just want you all to know that DOORS will continue to collaborate with DDA, people and services, and provider agencies to make decisions on a case-by-case basis when necessary. And then finally, a decision made by DDA related to CIE does not substitute for DOORS' own service authorization processes. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Appreciate you walking us through that. And I would also like to just take time again to thank our partners at DOORS, who have really been very great to work with as we've kind of talked through some of these issues. And I imagine we'll continue to have these conversations because, as Tony pointed out, DOORS is looking at positions and designating positions as CIE, and DDA is using our attestation slightly differently and looking at individual people and their particular jobs. So while there is a lot of alignment, we do want to be clear that just as Tony says, DDA may make a decision, but that does not hold DOORS to that decision, and vice versa. Now, if we started to experience a situation where things weren't aligning regularly, we would certainly get together and figure out why are things not aligning. So that's something that we're committed to working really closely on. So we'll keep you informed of those issues as they may arise. Okay, now that we've walked through the CIE guidance and the attestation, I want to stop there and just walk through a few questions that I imagine people are thinking and see if that at least helps get a few of the questions out of the way. So first one, when should a person start using the CIE attestation form? And the answer to that, the attestation can be used currently in an informal way for people and teams to make decisions related to service alignment, and also as kind of a conversation starter, if it hasn't happened already, around the qualities of the person's experience and things related to that. Once DDA distributes the formal policy, it will include a process flow for more formal usage, like how does, who gets the form and all of those kind of things, sort of the process piece that I haven't talked about today. So next question, what if a person's employment meets some but not all of the guidance criteria statements outlined? Well, the answer is the person can continue in that job, receiving supports through the service called career exploration. This will allow the person and their support team to explore all options that may exist, including those that may include making changes that would potentially make the job competitive and integrated per the guidance. Next question, what if a person's employment does not meet the CIE criteria and the person wants to continue doing it? Answer, anyone authorized for the career exploration service between now and July 2020 will create an employment goal within their person-centered plan during their annual team process that outlines their individual trajectory and transition time frame. DDA will continue working with people to identify barriers as well as any potential solutions moving forward. It's not DDA's intent to be disruptive. Instead, we want to work with people to explore all options that support continually getting closer to CIE. So in other words, that career exploration service would be the most appropriate service for employment outcomes that just don't quite hit the mark there. It doesn't mean that they might never be able to meet the criteria. Again, I feel confident that some people's employment with some adjustments may meet that definition, some may not, but we want to be able to figure out what the barriers are and to see the individual identified barriers in people's plans. Next question, if a person works part of the day in CIE and does other activities the rest of the day, how do we know which is the most appropriate service? So answer, until it's possible for a person to choose more than one service in a given day, the reality is that the person is going to have to choose one service for a particular day. So the person and their team should work together to identify which is the most appropriate service or services to meet a person's needs. All meaningful day services require a minimum of 4 hours of service to be received in order for the provider to bill for a given day. So again, if you have questions about the current services that exist and each of those service definitions, you can find them in our current community supports and community pathways waiver and in the presentation that I referenced earlier on in our website, where I walk a little bit through service alignment and how to best make those decisions. Question. In the next few months, people will begin planning dates that will include the period starting after July 1st, 2020. How can people and teams include updated service information in the person-centered plan when the services are not yet available? Great question. I get this one a lot, and the answer to that generically is services approved in the waiver application with the effective date of July 1st, 2020 will be reflected in the new person-centered plan detail authorization form. And this is a form that will be available for use starting in July, and DDA will be providing guidance around how to utilize that. But that's for a future webinar that is not today, but there will be a way to access services that haven't started yet for the process of person-centered plan authorization. Okay, so I know that there's a lot of concern about that process and how to do it, but we will be providing the guidance and walking you through how that should be occurring. Until that time, and until that PCP detail authorization form is available for use, I think it's important to continue having discussions during the person-centered planning process with people, with teams, to at least be talking through what are going to be the most appropriate services moving forward, both now and in the future, and capturing some of that information during the person-centered planning process. And I certainly think taking a look at the attestation form as a team with the person and walking through and kind of reviewing where the person is if they're employed would be a great conversation to have. And what about people that are self-employed or who have customized employment? And the answer to that, again, as I referenced earlier, this guidance is not meant to disqualify types of employment as long as they are competitive and integrated, and each would be considered on its own. Self-employment is an area in which DDA is currently developing more specific guidance, including definitions and how it could be supported through DDA-funded employment services. Because we don't, obviously self-employment is a little different, especially around things like wages and things like that. So we want to make sure that we provide more specific information around that, and I promise you it's coming. So earlier I referenced under the competitive criteria the idea of conflict of interest, and that providers would develop their own conflict of interest policy that would be reviewed and approved by DDA. So I'm going to just walk through a couple points related to that. So in order to remove any actual, perceived, or potential conflicts of interest, there should be firewalls created between the competitive integrated employment of a person receiving services and any meaningful day service being provided to the person. So to avoid such conflicts of interest, DDA certified employment service providers shall have DDA approved policies and procedures and practices in place that outline how they will do the following: provide full disclosure to participants regarding their choice of service providers, and that their competitive and integrated employment is not contingent upon them receiving services. Ensure that the person has continual access to explore competitive integrated employment with employers that are not the service provider. We want to ensure that participants are supported in exercising their right to choose providers. So for instance, again, if a person is working for a service provider as an employee and it's competitive and it's integrated and it's their job, it's not related to their services, the person needs to understand that they have the ability to choose another provider agency to provide their ongoing supports if they choose. Provide information to the person about the full range of services available, not just the services furnished by the current service provider. And obviously these are things that also fall under a CCS's role as a targeted case manager, but we also want to make sure that it's addressed at the provider level as well. We would want to know that the provider can ensure that support services provided by the employment service provider are separated from any employer and employee relationship that would exist. So for example, who is the person's supervisor and what natural supports exist at the job site? We would want to know how job coaching and support is limited to supports that are not otherwise available directly through the employer relationship. So for example, if you are hired by a business, there's going to be some inherent supervision and support that's available directly by the employer. If this happens to be a service provider, we would want to know where the separation lies between those typically available employer-employee relationship and natural supports versus what's happening potentially through follow-along and ongoing supports. And then finally, related to conflict of interest, we want to ensure that Medicaid funds are not used to pay wages for people employed by the provider, and also ensure that Medicaid waiver funds are not used to defray the expenses associated with starting up or operating a business. So again, the waiver funds that a person would be receiving to receive services would be for the support needed above and beyond the natural supports in order to support employment. Okay, so DDA will provide more guidance related to the official approval process for any conflict of interest policies, and will include in that guidance the finalized policy when it's distributed. But that's still being developed. This is more meant to at least get people started on thinking about what may need to be developed if appropriate for your organization. And again, it might not, could be that your organization doesn't directly hire a person with a disability, but we want to make sure if that happens and it's competitive and integrated, that these firewalls exist between both of those scenarios. So I want to stop for 1 second and just take a minute to see what kind of questions are in the question box. So bear with me 1 second, because I see there's a number of them. Okay, and I'm going to be upfront that it's possible I may not be able to answer your questions, and these might be things that we need to put in future guidance, so bear with me here. Sometimes federal jobs are frozen except for a Schedule A. Other times, being disabled is a requirement for being hired for a job, such as a Center for Independent Living. How are jobs like that handled? That's a really good question. I think that's something we'll have to, because that's more of a nuanced piece that we would want to make sure is captured, and we'll include that in future guidance. Bear with me here. Okay, there's a question for, this is a very long question. Let me skip that for a second. the question comes in, could CDS, which is Community Development Services, be used to support a job that is not competitive integrated employment? That's also a really good question. The guidance that we've been providing related to our day services is that CMS gave Maryland feedback that employment should not be included in our day services. So if someone needs support to maintain employment and it's competitive and integrated, it would fall under those employment services. And if they're engaged in work beyond just what might fall under kind of a time-limited paid experience for employment discovery, that it would fall under this pre-vocational heading, and our pre-vocational service is called career exploration. There's a question about providing contact information for Tony, and let me see if Tony's still available. Tony, are you still on with us?
I'm still here.
Could you provide your contact information for people that may have questions specifically related to doors?
Sure. My email address is long, and it's my first name is not really Tony, so LATONYA.CANNON, so Latonia Cannon at maryland.gov. My phone number is 410-554-9584.
Thank you very much. And there's a question, one other question for you, Tony, related to, can DOORS funds still be used for self-employment startup funds?
So it's still a thing, yes, but right now it's sort of on hold because we don't really have a vendor to help us with self-employment. So that was a service that we hired a vendor to help us with, and we just don't have a vendor right now. We don't have a contract right now. So yes, but it's just on hold for now.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Individuals that are currently in what DDA considers to be career exploration, will there be an expiration date on their support from DDA after July of 2020? So that's what I referenced pretty early on in one of the first slides related to people that are authorized for career exploration between now and July 1st, 2020 would have the ability to stay in that service as long as they have a trajectory outlined in the person-centered plan related to working towards CIE, and that would be the reauthorization would be based on, does the person still have a employment goal in the person-centered plan that's current, and are they still working on that trajectory? And then we have one more question. This has to do with competitive employment and someone's benefits. Great question, Jason. I'm going to reference you to a webinar that we did, gosh, I want to say it was in February, related to benefits. And actually, I'm not 100% sure if it's been uploaded to our website, but we do have other resources on our website related to benefits. We always recommend that if a person is seeking employment, or is already employed and wants to better understand how work affects their benefits, that they seek services from a certified benefits counselor, because those are very important considerations. But we had a really wonderful webinar from one of our partners, from one of the centers for Centers from Independence, and gosh, I'm forgetting which month that was in. It was either January or February, but he walked through really good information on that. Okay, the next question is, will DOORS or DDA provide funding for the job discovery process? So, Randy, great question. Discovery is already something that somebody can do under our current services, and starting July 1st, 2020, it is its own standalone service. And you asked that question twice, so hopefully that answered that. And And then someone's asking, yes, you are muted. All of our attendees are in listen-only mode, Agnes. And so you're only able to communicate via the question box and the chat box. And that's just to keep the noise down in the webinar. Okay, make sure I'm getting all of these. How would competitive employment affect someone who is self-directed? So again, the same thing would be true for a person that self-directs their services. If the person needs support in order to maintain their employment and they want to receive employment services, people that self-direct can self-direct employment services through their budget authority, and the same information would be true. If they want to be authorized for that particular service, then we would want to know that the employment is competitive and integrated so that they could be authorized for that. Oh, and somebody checked the website for me. Thank you. There's nothing from February. So I'll check to make sure that that webinar is uploaded. And I thought for sure it would have been by now, but that was a really good one related to benefits. Okay, and there's a really lengthy question on here, Joanne. I see your question. That might be one for an offline conversation because it's really long, related to several things that I'm not clear on. So I'll connect with you after this. I think I got through all of them. Here's one more. I know that many individuals work for the Chimes contracts and other similar contracts where individuals work in community settings making competitive wages and many receive benefits. Most of those positions are for individuals with disabilities, but they work in integrated environments. Is this type of position that may be an exception to CIE? So, Nikki, again, I'm going to say that the checklist is not meant to disqualify any certain type of employment. So if you're working with a person, what I would recommend is work with the person and go through the checklist and say, do these qualities exist for this person's job? If they do, then it would meet that definition. If it doesn't, then it would fall under the potential career exploration. The other question, will individuals who self-direct have employer authority over employment services? If not, why not? In our current waiver, Carol, the authorization, or pardon me, the authority for employment services after July 2020 is for budget authority only, as far as I make sure I'm 100% clear on that, but I believe that's accurate. Sorry, every time somebody types a new answer and it shifts my screen, so I have to keep scrolling down. Okay, I think we got it. Let me continue on with the rest of my slides here. Okay, so I'm going to shift gears to something that's completely unrelated to what I was just talking about, but it's a question that I've received a lot over the last few weeks, and I want to make sure that I'm walking through it so people are clear. So again, this references training requirements, very specific training requirements. And actually, Carol, this might get a little bit to your question about self-direction and budget authority. The employment services, discovery, job development, and self-employment development supports have very specific training requirements and a competency requirement. So I'm going to walk through that. In order for a provider to provide these services, an approved staff must provide proof of competency in the best practices of customized employment, as evidenced by completing and passing the Certified Employment Service Professional, or CESP exam, that's held through the Association of People Supporting Employment First, or APSE. We have way too many acronyms in our field. So the confusion has been about whether the ACRE certified trainings are also required. So let me talk you through this. Again, it's required that everyone becomes certified. Anybody doing this service, those 3 services that I said, must become certified by passing the CESP exam. This certification is a proof of competency, and passing this exam is evidence that the professional has the knowledge to do the work. So there are rules outlined by APSE related to who is able to sit for the exam and what type of experience you need in order to be able to sit for the exam. So in other words, if you don't have any experience doing that type of work, you're not going to be able to sit for the exam. And there isn't a training that's provided by APSE in order to prepare for the test per se. However, taking the 40-hour ACRE certified training is typically a good way to best prepare for the test. So it's possible that someone that hasn't taken the ACRE certification trainings has been doing this type of work for a really long time, and they have the necessary experience and quality and qualifies according to APSE to sit for the exam, and they pass it. However, most people are really going to have to go through a training in order to prepare to pass for the exam. It's also important to note that once you pass the CESP, it's up to the professional to maintain an active CESP certification. So again, you're going to be required, of course, every staff that's an approved staff is going to be required to take basic DDA required trainings, whatever those are per COMAR. It's recommended that you would take the ACRE certification training in order to prepare for the required CESP exam. Okay, again, you can find all of the details that are related to APSE certification and the exam process and what's required to sit for the exam process. You can find all of that directly on the APSE website. It's very easy to navigate and easy to look to easy to find what you need there. So again, I want to just be clear that reimbursement for both the ACRE certification class as well as sitting for the CESP exam are costs that can be reimbursed to providers until the new rates begin for those 3 services. Okay, so as long as you have proof that the person attended the trainings and that you paid for it, you can receive reimbursement for that. And for the CESP exam, you would need proof that it was paid for and that the person passed the exam in order to get reimbursed. So this reimbursement is retroactive all the way back to July 1st of 2018, all the way up until the new services begin with the new rates. Once the new rates come into place and the new billing takes effect, the cost that's associated with the training and the competency test, including the time it takes to go do those things, are actually included in the rate for the services. So this reimbursement is time limited, but we will keep doing that. So if you haven't been utilizing that, I would highly recommend that you do that. Again, once you have your invoices and proof of payment and all of those things, they can be submitted directly to your regional office for reimbursement. I also want to do a quick plug here for DDA's educational webinar series that started last week, and these are live webinars that have been happening each Tuesday at noon between now and April 30th, and they include various subjects, which I think people are very interested in. Things like applying for DDA services and eligibility determination, person-centered planning tools and strategies, person-centered plan authorization process, DDA waiver programs, including application and services, self-directed service delivery model, employment and meaningful day, behavior support services. So it's possible that these will be ongoing after that, but these are the ones that have been already kind of scheduled out to this at this point. So to register, you can go to DDA's training calendar on the website, and you can register for the webinars. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, if you register for one, it automatically registers you for the whole series. If you can't attend live, that's okay, because again, they're all recorded and they'll all be uploaded to the website, so you can kind of watch them at any time. And they're kind of meant to be standalone little modules just about each of those subject areas. So I highly recommend those. And finally, I want to make sure, again, people have contact information, and I see other questions coming in, so I'll get to those. Let me take a look here. Okay. Somebody says, to be clear, who is required to take the CESP exam? Does this include CCSs? No, it does not include CCSs. These are for provider agencies that are approved to provide the new employment services of discovery, job development, and self-employment development supports. So in order to do those services, the staff that are doing the service directly with the person that's going to be billable needs to be, has to show competency through passing the CESP exam. There's a question about getting paid, how long it should take. Great question. Andrea, you can feel free to circle back with me via email, and we can try to get you connected on that issue. Given the many reports of career exploration that is lip service only, doors will really need to monitor this service closely, meaning case reviews, etc. How does DDA plan to do that? I'm not 100% sure on what the question is asking. My interpretation of that is how would we make sure that a person that's receiving career exploration is engaged in some sort of exploration? And I think we need to, again, focus on the person, their individual identified outcomes and goals, and what is being done to work toward those. And that's how DDA is going to be approaching it. Were the required certifications only for employees working with discovery, or for supported employment services as well? So once again, supported employment is phasing out starting July 1st, 2020. So this does not apply to supported employment. It applies only to 3 of the new employment services that start July 1st, 2020. They include discovery, job development, and self-employment development supports. And actually, let me go back. Let me see if I can scroll back to my thing here. On the left-hand side of the screen, these are the 3 services that I'm referencing. These are the only 3 services where that higher competency level applies. Now, the other employment services, like ongoing supports, follow-along supports, there will be some additional training requirements for providers and people that are completing those services, but it's not this higher level of support. It would fall under the kind of this middle area where it says basic DDA required trainings, and those are things that DDA has not developed, but those would be things that would be included in COMAR once COMAR is updated. And something that comes to mind would be if you're someone that's doing ongoing supports for someone, you would need to know the basics of job coaching and how to support somebody on their job and those kind of things. But those things haven't been fleshed out yet. Okay, Cindy, if you go to the APSE website, you can get all the information about the CESP exam. There's a question about if a person volunteers and then later decides to hire the individual for a position, does that fall under CIE? So again, that would be dependent on what type of, once the person gets directly hired, does it meet those things that we talked about? Is it competitive? Is it integrated? Does it allow the same opportunities for advancement and benefits as other people? If the answer to those are yes, then it would fall under CIE. But again, it's up to each individual person. Carol, your question about self-direction and employment as to the whys, I may not be the person to answer that well, other than to say that's what's in our current waiver. So I don't know that I have any additional answers to that, although I can pass along your question. I can't sound right. Just going to do one last little scroll through these questions, guys, so please bear with me while I make sure that I didn't miss any. So everybody just look out the window for a second. And let me also say, while I'm scrolling through here, that if you do have questions or you think of some, please send them, because every time you send questions, it helps us provide even better and more nuanced guidance. So I would say please send that to my email address, which hold on one second, I'll bring it back up. I'm trying to do two things at once. Why did ACRE become recommended by DDA and not required? I thought it was required to have some amount of classroom time. Why did ACRE become recommended by DDA and not required? So again, the guidance that I gave today is consistent with what we've communicated. I think the confusion is that most people are probably going to have to take the ACRE certification class, because without it, they're not going to be able to sit for the CESP exam. However, there are some people that may already have taken training in the past, maybe wasn't the ACRE certification class. They've been doing job development for 25 years and are very competent people and have the skill and ability and are able to sit for the exam. But for most people, that may not be true, especially, again, if you're someone that's newer to the field, you're just starting, maybe you're doing some job coaching, and you have some amount of experience under your belt. That's what the ACRE certification is, certified training is for, is to prepare you for the CESP. So while it isn't strictly a requirement, it's going to be recommended highly if you are unable to pass the test without it. Yep, this is a good question. Some self-employment is home-based and difficult to make fully integrated. Most businesses do not make a profit the first year. How does this work for someone doing self-employment who also self-directs? That's a really great question. And I referenced earlier that DDA is developing kind of more guidance specifically related to self-employment, because they're kind of the language around self-employment, and as you said, things like profit versus wages and things like that doesn't really equate to the same language that I used related to CIE. So we want to develop some separate guidance about how do we define self-employment, and if someone needs support needs support related to self-employment, what would that look like? What would we be authorizing, and how would a person that self-directs or anybody access that? So keep holding that thought, Anna. That's great, and we're gonna keep developing that. Okay, so as I was saying, if you have questions or you think of questions, something didn't make sense, you have a more specific scenario and you're struggling, you can email me. I would ask, as I've been asking consistently, to please copy your regional employment lead from your region so you can see all of their lovely email addresses up here. Eastern Shore region, we have Kathleen Walker. Central, we have Lachelle Green. Western, we have Brenda Spiro. Southern, we have Jasmine Thomas. And these ladies are really knowledgeable about employment services as well, and we want to make sure to keep people connected to the regional office as we build out this guidance. So it says, one last question here. To clarify, direct support staff will need the CESP under the listed services. So Jonathan, again, if the staff that you're referencing is the person that's doing the activities of discovery, and they're going to be completing the discovery profile that's going to be submitted in order to bill for discovery, then yes, that staff that's doing that discovery would need to be a current CESP. Something that and I talked about this in the last webinar, but I'll say it again, something that DDA is looking at, including in the policy related to training, is for situations when a employment staff is newly hired at an organization and perhaps they have not been able to sit for the CESP exam yet, that they would have the opportunity to work under a supervisor that is a CESP for a certain amount of time, maybe 6 months, and I don't know that we've outlined that time yet, so that supervisor can review and sign off on that work while the person is getting additional experience and training that allows them to sit for the CESP exam. Okay, so it says, moving forward, folks that are provider employed, CCS will add the attestation form. Is the form initiated by the provider or the CCS? So again, I would say a couple of things. Right now, so right now in the end of March, the way that this would be used now is on an informal basis as a way for people and teams to look at their current employment when thinking about what is the proper service to align to. So it might be that the person's doing some type of employment, but they're not sure. Is this really competitive integrated employment, or is this maybe something that would fall under career exploration? So right now, we would ask that people use it in an informal way. After July 1st, 2020, we would be using it as a way to authorize our ongoing and follow-along supports. So in that situation, if a person's seeking that authorization, and there could be two different circumstances. It could be a person new coming into services that already has a job and is seeking those ongoing or follow-along supports. In that situation, the person may not have a provider yet. So in that situation, it would be the person in their CCS would be looking at the form. Another situation could be a person's already in services and they're receiving maybe rehabilitation services, but now they got a job and they're seeking authorization for ongoing and follow-along supports. At that time, the employment service provider that's helped the person get the job would want to help work through that that attestation form along with the person, and the provider could sign it along with the person. So it's flexible. We want people to be able to use it in a way that's appropriate for them, but obviously as this is all brand new, so I would say just like anything, we may need to adjust guidance based on new information or based on how it's working, but this is more being used informally at this point. And obviously when we send out the final guidance and policy, it will include a process flow and all of those good things. Okay, to clarify, the 720 hours of career exploration per plan year, is this one time only for a person, or could they use it up to 720 hours again? Say if the person had CIE, then lost that position after a few years. Good question, Laurie, and the answer to that is the person would be authorized one time for career exploration for up to 720 hours for a plan year. However, that doesn't mean that if a person gets a job and loses it, that there aren't other ways to support them. Because again, we have this brand new menu of employment services that start in July of 2020 that would include discovery, job development. A person can certainly do things that can prepare them for work under DayHab and community development services. So it's not that there aren't services available after that time. It's just a matter of making sure that it matches up with their person-centered plan. Okay. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for participating today. As I said, please feel free to send your more nuanced questions. Questions related to self-direction. Those were good questions. I don't have all of the answers, but I will make sure that we speak to that in a future webinar. Okay, hold on. We've got one more question coming in. July 2020 individuals approved for supported employment. Will MSFP need to be completed to align to appropriate services? So I'm going to recommend, again, that to go back and watch the webinar that was recorded in January, where I kind of walk through the service alignment process. That might be helpful. So service alignment can be happening now if appropriate. So if a person's in supported employment and they're competitively employed, they don't have to do anything currently. They're already in the right service. But as we approach July 2020, as people in the next year go through their person-centered planning process, the people and their teams should be identifying after 2020 what's going to be the most appropriate service or services. And earlier in the presentation, I referenced the person-centered planning authorization form that DDA would be providing more guidance on around July of this year. So that might be what you're speaking to. And last question, will this PowerPoint be available at a later time? Yes. The PowerPoint is available right now for download on the right-hand side of your screen. In the, towards the bottom of your screen, it says handouts. It will also be sent directly to everybody that participated, or not participated, anybody that registered for today's webinar. You'll receive an email. It will also be uploaded to the website along with this recorded webinar. So everybody that didn't get the beginning of it, you can watch it all over again. And you're quite welcome. Thank you. Okay, I think we made it to the end. Thank you for participating. I'm going to end for today. Hope everybody has a lovely weekend, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.